The Roanoke River moved differently at night. Not violently, not noisily. It simply moved the way very old things move. Slowly, without explanation, carrying weight that daylight refused to acknowledge. There are rivers that sound clean when they pass through a place, rivers that sparkle, rivers that make people feel God is nearby. The Roanoke was not that kind of river. Moved like memory, dark, patient, carrying everything it had ever touched. In 1692, the Carolina colony still felt half wild. Roads disappeared into forest. Swamps breathed fog before dawn. The trees leaned over muddy paths like people listening to conversations they were not invited to hear. And along a stretch of black river water, far from any settlement a decent person would choose to reach, stood Shadowbrook Plantation. The estate had been carved from wilderness the way cruelty carves itself into a person, violently, leaving something wrong behind. The tobacco field spread in long green rows across cleared land. The big house sat on higher ground, surrounded by oak trees bent sideways from years of coastal wind. And downhill near the swamp water, the quarters. Small cabins pressed together in the mud, smoke rising from cook fires before sunrise. Children sleeping 3 and 4 together beneath rough blankets while their mothers lay awake, counting sounds in the darkness. Everything at Shadowbrook moved according to fear. Fear woke people before the bell rang. Fear kept eyes lowered during inspection. Fear sat beside every meal. Fear rested between people in the darkness. And fear was precisely how Master Richard Voss preferred it. Because powerful men understand something simple. Bodies can survive almost anything. But once fear enters the spirit, control requires almost no effort at all. There was a woman named Essie. She had lived at Shadowbrook for 11 years, long enough to know every board that creaked after dark, every overseer's mood before the morning inspection, every plant along the swamp edge that could ease fever. Essie was 31 years old. Her hands stayed permanently stained from tobacco leaves. Her shoulders ached in winter from old work injuries nobody had treated properly. And her face carried the expression of someone who had learned to keep the most important things hidden very deep inside herself. Not because Essie was broken, because she was careful. There is a difference between broken and careful. Broken people stop hoping. Careful people hope with tremendous precision. 3 years before the dreams began, Essie had a daughter. Her name was Adwoa, 4 years old, small for her age, but loud with it. She laughed with her whole body the way children do before the world teaches them to be quiet. She had her mother's eyes, dark, watchful, missing nothing. On a Tuesday morning in September, a wagon arrived at Shadowbrook. A buyer from Charleston, looking for children of a specific age. Essie was in the tobacco field when it happened. She heard Adwoa screaming her name from the direction of the quarters. That sound, that specific sound. Essie would carry it inside her chest for the rest of her life, like a stone she could not put down. By the time she reached the yard, the wagon was already moving. She ran after it barefoot across the dirt road, screaming, reaching, until an overseer's horse blocked the path. The wagon disappeared around the tree line. Adwoa's small hands were still visible above the wagon boards for a few seconds longer, reaching back. Then the trees swallowed everything. After that day, something changed inside Essie. Not visibly. That was the important part. She still worked, still ate, still woke before the bell rang, still lowered her eyes at the right moments. But something deep inside her had begun listening very carefully to the world around her. as though if she paid close enough attention, the world might eventually tell her where her daughter was. People noticed small things. Essie had always been perceptive. Now she seemed to perceive things before they happened. She warned a woman named Sepha 2 days before the overseer singled her out for punishment. She predicted rain 3 mornings before the clouds gathered. She woke suddenly one night and moved her sleeping mat moments before the cabin roof leaked directly onto that spot. Nobody spoke about it directly, but people began positioning themselves near Essie during the day, as though standing beside her made them slightly safer. It was Nana Abina who finally said something aloud. Nana Abina was the oldest person at Shadowbrook. Nobody knew her exact age because nobody had thought to count the years of an enslaved woman's life with any care. Her back curved sharply from decades of labor. Her hands had twisted into their own shapes from years of work. But her eyes looked like the river at night, deep, dark, containing everything. One evening, 3 nights before the autumn full moon, Nana Abina sat outside her cabin shelling beans. Essie passed carrying water. The old woman did not look up immediately. Then, quietly, "The land is trying to tell you something." Essie slowed, stopped. "Tell me what?" Nana Abina finally looked up. Her eyes studied Essie's face for a long moment. "Your grief is very loud," she said softly. "Louder than you know." Essie looked toward the river. The water moved slowly through the trees in the distance. "Loud to who?" she whispered. The old woman returned to her beans, and after a very long pause, "To the ones who already crossed it." Essie did not sleep easily that night. The cabin felt different somehow. Too quiet. Not the familiar quiet of exhausted people sleeping. This felt like the quiet inside a held breath. She lay on her mat listening to the sounds of the plantation after dark. Wind through the tobacco leaves, the creak of the big house settling on the hill, the slow movement of the river beyond the tree line. And beneath all of it, something else. A low sound, not quite heard with the ears, more felt beneath the sternum, like the memory of a drum. She was asleep before she understood she had closed her eyes. The dream arrived the way deep water arrives when you step off something solid, instantly, completely. One moment, darkness, the next, a river. Not the Roanoke, something older, something wider, under stars arranged in patterns Essie did not recognize from Carolina skies. The water caught the starlight differently here, like hammered silver, like something precious and alive. The air smelled of rain on dry earth, of smoke from cooking fires, of flowers she had no English name for. And along the riverbank, figures, hundreds of them, standing silently in the darkness. Men in robes with gold borders, women wrapped in bright cloth holding children, elders with staffs carved into shapes Essie felt she should recognize. All of them watching her, not threatening, waiting. Essie looked down at her own hands. The tobacco stains were gone. The calluses from the iron tools were gone. The scar along her left wrist from a broken hoe handle years ago? Gone. She turned her hands over slowly. Behind her, someone made a sound, not loud, only a small sound. A child's sound. Essie turned. Adwoa stood barefoot in the shallow water near the bank. Small, alive, looking at her mother with those dark, watchful eyes. Essie made a sound she had no words for. She crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and dropped to her knees in the water, pulling her daughter against her chest. The child felt warm, completely warm, real in the way only living things are real. Essie held her and could not speak. After a long moment, Adwoa pulled back slightly. Her small face studied her mother's. Then she said quietly, "The old one wants to talk to you." Essie looked up. Across the river, a figure had stepped forward from the crowd of ancestors. Tall, very tall, skin dark as river stone beneath the stars. His eyes caught the light differently than human eyes should. Not glowing exactly, more like they contained something rather than reflected it. He did not appear young or old. He appeared permanent. The way mountains appear permanent, the way rivers appear permanent. Things that existed before language gave them names. He looked at Essie without urgency. Then he spoke. His voice did not travel through air. It arrived inside her chest the way drums are felt before they are heard. "You have carried the grief for 3 years." Essie could not answer. Her daughter's hand was still inside hers. The figure stepped closer. "The child is not lost." Essie's eyes filled immediately. "She breathes," he said simply. "Somewhere south of here, near water. She still hums the song you taught her." The drums, somewhere beyond sight, grew louder. "But that is not why I called you here." He knelt beside the shining river, and as his palm touched the water, images appeared across its surface. Not visions of the future, visions of the present. Shadowbrook as it truly was, not as the masters described it, not as the legal documents recorded it, as the land itself had experienced it. Children separated from mothers. Men worked past the capacity of their bodies. Women who had stopped counting their own suffering because counting made it heavier. The river showed each face, each name, and underneath every image, the land itself, saturated, dense with something that had no word in English. The accumulation of uncounted grief pressing down into the Carolina soil for decades. "The earth remembers suffering longer than people do," the figure said quietly. "And when the suffering grows deep enough," the water rippled, "the earth begins calling for help." Essie stared at the images moving across the water's surface. "You are being called," the ancestor said, "not because you are special." He looked at her steadily. "Because you listened." Essie woke before dawn with her daughter's warmth still on her hands. She lay completely still for several moments, breathing, feeling the rough blanket beneath her, the familiar smell of the cabin, the sounds of sleeping people around her. Then, slowly, she became aware that the other sounds had changed. All around her in the darkness, people were breathing differently. Not the slow rhythm of deep sleep, the sharp, unsteady breath of someone who has just woken from something enormous. One by one, in the darkness, she heard people sitting up. No one spoke, because no one knew yet whether speaking aloud would break something fragile. But through the darkness of that cabin, Essie felt it clearly. The way you feel a fire before you see it. Everyone had gone to the same river. By sunrise, something had shifted inside Shadowbrook. Not visibly, not in any way the overseers could name at morning inspection, but Essie felt it moving through the quarters like clean air after long weeks of heat. People stood straighter without intending to. Eyes met differently than before. Silences between workers carried weight now, where previously they had carried only exhaustion. She passed Nana Abina near the cook fire before the bell rang. The old woman looked at her carefully, then smiled. Not happily, not triumphantly, only with recognition. The kind of smile that says, "It has begun." Master Richard Voss noticed the change by the second day. He was a tall man, hard-faced, the kind of person shaped entirely by the need to appear in control of everything around him. He had inherited Shadowbrook at 23 from a father who had also inherited it from a man who had taken it from Wilderness by methods the legal records politely omitted. Voss understood his property. Every acre of field, every barrel of tobacco, every tool in the storage shed. And he understood the people he owned in the same way powerful men often understand human beings, as instruments. Instruments that functioned best when slightly afraid. Which was why the change troubled him so completely. The people were still working, still lowering their eyes when required, still following instructions, but they moved differently. Not slower, differently, with a kind of quiet internal steadiness that Voss had spent 20 years making sure they never had. He watched from horseback while riding through the fields that morning. 3 women working a tobacco row ahead of him paused at the exact same moment. Not because of any signal he could see. They simply stopped together, looked toward the tree line, then continued working, as though they had jointly noticed something and jointly decided not to react to it. Voss pulled his horse up sharply. "Keep moving," he shouted. They obeyed immediately, but not from fear. That was what turned his blood cold. They obeyed the way a person obeys a request from someone they have already internally dismissed. He summoned his overseer, Caleb Turner, that evening. Turner was a broad man with red hands and small eyes that moved constantly. "Something's different down in the quarters," Voss said. Turner sipped his cider and nodded. "Been noticing it myself." "What's causing it?" "Don't rightly know." Turner shifted in his chair. "It ain't talking, ain't meeting, ain't organizing anything I can find signs of." "Then what is it?" Turner set down his cup. "It's like they all decided something together at the same time, without saying a word." Voss stared at the fire for a long time after that. The second dream came 3 nights later. Essie was ready for it, or thought she was. She closed her eyes and the river appeared immediately. But the ancestor was already standing at the water's edge waiting, as though he had remained there the entire time between dreams. He looked at her with the same patient expression. Then he said, "Someone is coming to examine you." Essie frowned. "Examine?" "A man with instruments, a man who needs the world explained before he believes it." The ancestor looked across the water. "He will be the most important person who passes through this place." "Because he breaks things apart," Essie said slowly. "Yes." "Will he help us?" The ancestor considered this. Then, "Only if he survives what he finds here." Dr. William Hargrove arrived at Shadowbrook on a gray November morning. The man stepped from his carriage precisely the way Essie expected from the dream. Sharp movements, dark wool coat, the particular posture of someone who uses intelligence as armor. He was a physician from Charlestown, published, methodical, known for his devotion to examination over assumption. He had been summoned by Voss to investigate what the master delicately called a peculiar disorder affecting behavior in the quarters. Hargrove set his bags down inside the guest room and immediately began taking notes. Essie knew he had arrived before the house servants told her. she had known since the morning. She waited. Hargrove requested to begin examinations the following day. He set up in the overseer's office. Table cleared, candles lit, notebook open. Workers were brought to him one at a time. He asked questions in a careful, measured voice. How long had they slept last night? Had they eaten? Did they experience headaches? Had they noticed unusual sounds at night? The doctor was looking for illness, a rational explanation. Essie was brought in mid-morning. She sat across from him with her hands folded in her lap. Hargrove studied her face with professional calm. "I'm told you've been organizing the workers," he said without aggression. "Coordinating behavior." "No, sir," Essie replied. He studied her. "Then, how do you explain the coordination I've been observing?" Essie looked at the candle on the desk between them. "We dream together," she said simply. The physician's pen stopped moving. He looked up. "I beg your pardon?" "Every night for 3 weeks. The same river, the same ancestors. Everyone." Hargrove set down his pen carefully, the way a person sets down something fragile. "You believe you are having coordinated dreams?" "I don't believe it," Essie said. "I know it." The doctor studied her for a long time. Then quietly, "Can you tell me something about the dream that would be impossible for you to have known otherwise?" Essie looked at him, then calmly, "Your wife died 2 winters ago." Hargrove went completely still. "Her name was Margaret. She died of fever in December. You keep her wedding ring inside your left coat pocket now because you cannot bring yourself to wear it on your hand. But you cannot bring yourself to leave it at home, either." The candle between them flickered despite no wind. The physician's hand moved slowly to his left coat pocket. His fingers pressed against the fabric from the outside. He did not reach inside. He did not need to. His face had gone the color of old paper. "How did you know that?" he whispered. Essie held his gaze steadily. "The ancestor showed me what I needed to know," she said. "So you would listen." Hargrove canceled all appointments for the rest of that day. He locked himself inside his guest room, and Essie heard him pacing from before noon until after midnight. She sat outside the quarters in the cold air and listened to his footsteps moving back and forth through the floor above. Back and forth. Back and forth. A man trying to outpace something his education had never prepared him for. The following morning he appeared at the cook fire before sunrise, dark circles beneath his eyes, his normally precise coat slightly rumpled. He stood near Essie without speaking for several minutes. Finally, "I need to conduct a proper examination," he said. "Scientific, rigorous, no assumptions." Essie looked at him quietly. "What kind of examination?" "I want to document what is happening here." His voice remained steady, but something beneath it had changed. Something cracked open slightly. "I need to understand it." Essie considered this. Then softly, "The dream will come tonight, if you sleep here." Hargrove's jaw tightened. "I am aware of that." A pause, then very quietly, "That is precisely why I intend to." The doctor spent that full day with a methodical ferocity that Essie found almost impressive. He examined workers individually. Same questions, different approach. He was no longer looking for illness, he was looking for patterns. He documented sleep times. He noted the moment each person's story began, 3 weeks earlier, same night for everyone. He asked about the river, the stars, the figure. Every answer matched. Precise details. The same river bend, the same pattern of stars, the same ancestor standing waist-deep in water. Workers who had never spoken to each other described the same cracked bark pattern on the tree beside the riverbank, the same smell of rain on earth, the same drums felt more than heard. Hargrove's notebook filled rapidly. His handwriting grew progressively smaller, more compressed, as though space on the page was running short. By evening, he turned to a new page and wrote at the top, "No evidence of fabrication, no evidence of communication between subjects during dreams. Consistency exceeds statistical probability of coincidence by a factor I cannot calculate using current methodology." He stopped writing there, stared at what he had written, then added beneath it, "I am afraid to sleep tonight." The third dream found him anyway. Essie knew because she was already standing at the river when the doctor arrived. He appeared on the bank looking exactly as disoriented as a rational man should look inside an impossible place. He turned in a slow circle, looked at his hands, looked at the sky, then looked at Essie. "This is real," he said. Not a question. "Yes," she answered. Hargrove sat down heavily on the bank. The ancestor crossed the river slowly and stood before him. The doctor stared up at the figure for a long moment. Then the ancestor said quietly, "You came to explain us away." "Yes," Hargrove admitted. "And now?" The physician looked at the water, at the thousands of faces watching silently from the opposite shore, at the impossible stars above this impossible river. Then he reached into his coat pocket, removed his notebook, and placed it on the ground beside him. "I have no language for this," he said. The ancestor looked at him steadily. "You do not need language," he said. "You need courage." When Hargrove woke before dawn, he lay still for several minutes. Then he rose, dressed, went downstairs, and did something Essie had not expected. He went directly to Master Voss's study, knocked before sunrise. Voss answered with suspicion etched across his tired face. Hargrove stood in the doorway. "I've completed my examination," the doctor said. Voss leaned against the doorframe. "And?" A long pause. Then Hargrove said something that neither man would ever forget. "There is nothing I can do for you here." Voss stared. "What does that mean?" "It means," the doctor said carefully, "that what is happening in your quarters is beyond anything medicine can classify." Silence. "And it means something else." Hargrove held the other man's gaze. "Whatever has been invited into this place," he glanced toward the window overlooking the fields, "it did not arrive from outside." Voss's face hardened. "You're telling me my own property is—" "I am telling you," Hargrove interrupted quietly, "that the land remembers what you have done on it." The fire in the study cracked sharply. The physician retrieved his bag from the hallway and walked out of Shadowbrook before breakfast. From the morning Hargrove left, Voss became a different kind of man. Not weaker in the ways others could see immediately, weaker in the specific way that frightens people most in powerful men. Desperate. He doubled patrols, tripled punishments for small infractions, ordered searches of the quarters every 3 days. Nothing. No weapons hidden, no letters found, no meetings discovered. Only silence. And that terrible, coordinated calmness. The overseers felt it worsen daily. Turner approached Voss after 2 weeks of failed searches. "There's nothing to find," he muttered. "Then look harder," Voss snapped. "We've looked in everything short of the swamp itself." Voss turned from the window sharply. "Then look there, too." Turner said nothing, but his eyes moved toward the swamp tree line and did not move back. Because ever since the dreams began, none of the overseers wanted to go near the swamp after dark. Nana Abina began dying in December. She knew it before the fever arrived. She told Essie 2 weeks before, not with grief, with the particular calmness of someone who has lived long enough to understand that death is less frightening than what comes before it. "The ancestor has already spoken to me," she said simply. Essie sat beside her. "What did he say?" The old woman looked toward the river visible through the cabin doorway. "He said I worked long enough." She looked at Essie sideways. Something resembling humor moved across her face briefly. "He also said, you don't need me anymore." Essie felt the familiar weight settle in her chest. "I still need you." Nana Abina reached over and placed one twisted hand across Essie's. "The child still hums," she said softly. Essie went still. "Your daughter," the old woman continued. "She hums the song. The ancestor told me this morning." A pause. "She is alive." Essie could not speak. Nana Abina squeezed her hand once. "That is what you needed to hear." The old woman died 6 days later, quietly, in the night, between the 3rd and 4th hour of darkness, the exact hour when the dreams arrived. Something changed in the quarters after Nana Abina's death. Not depression, something older, a deepening, like roots pressing further into earth. The dreams returned that same night with a different quality, heavier, more present, as though Nana Abina had crossed the river and immediately added her voice to the ancestors. The figures on the opposite bank numbered differently now. One more among them, standing near the front. A curved back, twisted hands, eyes like the river at night, looking at Essie directly and smiling. The mirror cracked first in January, the large one in the main house hallway, a thin fracture appearing overnight across the full length of the glass. No earthquake, no impact mark, no explanation. The following week, 2 more cracked. Then a window in the upstairs bedroom developed a split from corner to corner without anyone touching it. Voss ordered the mirrors covered. 3 days later, new cracks appeared inside the covered glass, as though whatever made them did not require visibility to work. The plantation dogs stopped entering the quarters entirely, then stopped entering the yard between the quarters and the main house, then simply stopped patrolling altogether. They gathered near the fence line each evening facing the house, standing in a row, ears flat, making no sound, just watching. Turner tried driving them toward the quarters twice. Both times the animals turned around and pushed back against him. Not aggressively, steadily, like things that had made a decision and would not unmake it. Then came the incident with the candles. Essie heard about it secondhand from a house servant named Grace. Grace was delivering linens upstairs when she noticed something strange in the east hallway. 6 wall candles burning normally. Then Essie appeared at the far end of the corridor. Not walking quickly, not doing anything, simply crossing from one room to another. All 6 candles went out simultaneously. Complete darkness. Grace froze. Then slowly, one by one, the candles relit themselves. By the time the sixth flame returned, Essie had already passed through to the next room. Grace said nothing for 3 days, then told everyone. The overseers began leaving. First, one disappeared from the eastern patrol before sunrise. His horse was found near the river, saddled, reins still knotted, perfectly calm. No man. A second overseer approached Voss, asking permission to return to Charlestown for personal reasons. Voss refused. The man left anyway. A third was found sitting inside the storage barn at dawn, holding his own hat in both hands, staring at nothing, unable to explain how he had come to be sitting there or how many hours he had been inside. He left before noon without collecting wages or belongings. Caleb Turner lasted longer than the others. He was harder, more stubborn, more invested in the specific belief that power should always belong to men like him. But even Turner began to change. Essie noticed it in the way he moved through the quarters during inspection. He no longer rode with his full arrogance. He moved quickly, eyes cutting to corners, the look of a man who has started hearing things he cannot explain. Then one morning he approached Essie directly while she worked the tobacco rows. He pulled up his horse, looked down at her, for a long moment said nothing. Then, "What did you do to this place?" Essie continued working without looking up. "Nothing was done," she said. "Something is wrong here." His voice had dropped below his normal volume, as though he did not want anyone else to hear. "Something started, and I need to know what." Essie finally looked up at him, calmly, directly. "We remembered something," she said. Turner stared. "Remembered what?" Essie looked toward the tree line. "That your fear only works when we believe it." The horse shifted beneath him. Turner's jaw tightened. He raised his crop, then stopped, because in that moment he realized something terrible. He was more frightened of the woman standing before him than she was of him. And once that is true, the crop means nothing. He rode away without striking her. He left Shadowbrook 2 days later. By February, only Voss remained. Him and a skeleton household staff who stayed partly from loyalty and partly from the practical impossibility of leaving in winter. The plantation felt enormous around the few who remained. Too much silence, too many empty rooms. The fields still produced, work still happened, but the overseer system had dissolved, and Shadowbrook had not collapsed. That frightened Voss most of all, because it meant the plantation had never truly needed him. It had needed the fear he manufactured. And fear was no longer the currency it had been. Voss summoned Essie to the main house on the last Tuesday of February, the first time she had entered the big house since she arrived at Shadowbrook 11 years earlier. She walked through the front door and looked around the entrance hall. The covered mirrors, the cracked windows, the candles burning at an odd angle despite no draft. The house smelled of tobacco smoke and something underneath it, something older, damp, like river mud that had found its way inside and refused to leave. Voss sat beside the fireplace in the main parlor. He looked smaller than she remembered him appearing from a distance, thinner. His hands rested on the chair arms, and she could see from across the room that they were not entirely still. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then, "Tell me how to stop it." Essie stood near the doorway. She looked at this man who had controlled her life for 11 years, who had sold her daughter, who had watched suffering the way other men watched weather, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not hatred, something quieter than hatred. Almost sadness. "You cannot stop it," she said. "Everything has a solution," Voss said. "I will pay for the solution. I will change whatever needs changing." Essie shook her head slowly. "The land has been listening for decades," she said. "You cannot pay the land." Voss leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped. "What does it want?" Essie looked at him steadily. "It doesn't want anything," she said. "It remembers everything. And it has stopped pretending otherwise." The fire cracked. A cloth covering one of the mirrors shifted in no wind. Voss stared at it. Then, quietly, in a voice that might have belonged to a different kind of man, "What happens now?" Essie considered the question carefully. Then, "That depends on what you do." She turned toward the door. "The dreams come from below this land," she said without looking back. 11 years of suffering. 20 years before I came. Longer before that. A pause. "The ancestors do not need your permission." She walked out of the house, and behind her, every candle in the parlor went out simultaneously. What happened at Shadowbrook in the weeks that followed is difficult to document precisely, not because nothing happened, because the records were kept by men who did not want the truth preserved. But the people there remembered, and memory is its own kind of record. The dreams continued every night, deeper, more instructive, the ancestor teaching through direct knowing rather than words. Roots through the swamp where dogs lost the scent, plants along the river that treated wounds the overseers would not let plantation doctors see, ways to carry a sleeping child through moving water without waking them. 2 young men disappeared in March, then a family of 5, then 3 women who had been at Shadowbrook longer than anyone could remember. The swamp swallowed their tracks completely. The colonies searched, found nothing. Then came the night the river rose. Not a flood, nothing that dramatic. The river simply rose several inches before dawn and left dark watermarks along the fence posts nearest the main house, as though it had walked up to the property line and considered crossing it. Essie stood outside her cabin on the last night of March. The moon sat large above the Carolina trees. A few remaining people stood beside her. Not every enslaved person remained at Shadowbrook. Many had already gone, taken by the dream paths into the wilderness. Those who stayed had stayed for specific reasons. Older people who could not walk the swamp distance. Mothers waiting for information about sold children. People connected to this land in ways the ancestor had told them required presence, not departure. Essie watched the big house on the hill above her. 1 candle burned in the upstairs window. Voss was still inside. He had not emerged in 4 days. The house servant said he no longer slept, walked the halls at night speaking to people only he could see, refused food, fired pistols into empty rooms. Essie looked at the candle for a long time, then looked at the river. The water moved slowly in the moonlight, and she heard something that lifted every hair on her arms. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the swamp tree line, Adwoa's song. Just the melody, no words, drifting through the cold March air, from the direction of nothing, from the direction of the dream river, from everywhere at once. Essie pressed both hands against her chest, closed her eyes. "I hear you," she whispered. The song continued for 7 seconds. Then the night went quiet again. She went to the ancestor one final time that night. He stood at the water's edge as always, patient, permanent. He looked at her with the same expression he had worn since the first dream, something between sorrow and certainty. "Am I leaving?" Essie asked. "Yes." She swallowed. "Will I find her?" The ancestor was quiet for a moment. Then he reached down and touched the silver water. An image appeared. A girl humming near a low fire. Thin, older than Essie remembered, but alive, but awake, but bearing her mother's eyes and her mother's face. Essie watched until the image dissolved. Then she looked at the ancestor directly. "What happens to this place?" He looked across the river at the thousands of watching faces, then back at her. "The land keeps what it holds," he said. "It held suffering long enough." A pause. "Now it holds remembering." She left Shadowbrook the following morning before sunrise, with 5 others, following the path the ancestor had shown them. Through the swamp, through the fog, through the specific stretch of water where the cypress trees grew so close together that the sky disappeared above them. Into the wilderness, into the darkness, into the particular kind of freedom that has no documents, no permission, no name in any record that survived. What remained at Shadowbrook afterward is harder to describe. Voss was found inside the main house 6 weeks later by a neighbor who came looking. Alive, but barely recognizable. He had written on the walls hundreds of words, most of them illegible, but one phrase repeated throughout every room, scratched over and over in varying sizes. "The land remembers. The land remembers. The land remembers." He never spoke clearly again. The neighboring family attempted selling the plantation twice. Both buyers left before completing the papers. The first claimed the house made sounds at night inconsistent with settling wood or river wind. The second refused to explain his departure at all. He simply left. And from the description his wagon driver gave later, he had seen something in the upstairs east window on their first night. A figure. A woman. Standing still in the darkness, looking out across the fields. The driver swore she turned and looked directly at the wagon when he glanced up, across the distance, through glass, directly at him. Not threatening, only watching. The tobacco fields failed completely the following year. The soil produced nothing. Agricultural men who examined it found no explanation. Normal composition, normal moisture, normal pH. But nothing grew there. Not even weeds. As though the earth had decided it was finished being used. The swamp slowly reclaimed the cleared land over the following decade. Trees returned, water spread across the old field rows. Cypress knees broke through the tobacco furrows. By 1710, Shadowbrook Plantation had nearly disappeared beneath Carolina growth. A few chimney foundations, a section of fence post, the ghost of a road becoming swamp. Travelers avoided it. Locals had already developed the particular language communities develop around places they fear. Not direct warning, casual redirection. There's a better road east. The river fords easier further upstream. The kind of guidance that has one true meaning. Do not go there after dark. But the dreams continued. That was the part the records could not suppress. Because dreams do not require property. Travelers camping near the old plantation grounds reported them. Hunters who slept too close to the river boundary woke speaking of the same water, the same stars, the same figure watching from the middle of the current. A preacher passing through with his congregation avoided the area for 3 days after several members of his group woke weeping simultaneously before dawn and could not explain why. He wrote to a colleague in Williamsburg about it. The land near the abandoned Voss estate induces a peculiar shared grief in travelers who sleep within half a mile of the old boundary. I have no theological explanation, only a strong recommendation to avoid the area entirely. The maroon communities found from the ancestors' guidance survived longer than the colonies wanted to acknowledge. Decades. Hidden in the Carolina swamp wilderness where search parties stopped going after too many unexplained returns. Men who rode in healthy, coming back gaunt, unable to explain how long they had wandered, speaking in pieces about sounds from the fog, about eyes inside the cypress shadows, about waking inside a dream they could not identify but recognized. The communities left no written records, but the oral memory survived in specific family lines along the Carolina and Virginia coasts. And in those families, grandmothers still told the story at night. The plantation where everyone dreamed the same dream. The river that remembered. The ancestor who taught people that fear only has power while it is believed. Modern visitors who travel to where Shadowbrook once stood find mostly swamp now. Spanish moss draping the old cypress trees, black water moving slowly between the root systems, the occasional stone foundation visible beneath the surface at low water. They bring cameras, flashlights, recorders. They expect ghosts. What they experience is harder to name. Phones lose signal near the old boundary. Compasses behave strangely. Animals refuse entering certain sections of the water regardless of training. And at night, if they stay, the dreams come. Not to everyone, not always, but to some, particularly to people carrying something unprocessed inside them. Grief they have not spoken, guilt they have not confronted, love they have not been allowed to show. Those people wake before dawn beside that river in the dark, and the ancestor is always waiting at the water's edge, patient, permanent, looking at them with those eyes that contain more than any single human life could accumulate. He never threatens. He never harms. He simply looks. And in looking, he sees everything. The way the most honest part of you sees yourself in the quiet hours before sunrise, when the lies you tell the rest of the day have not yet assembled themselves. One woman who visited the site in recent years came specifically because she had heard the stories. She was older, had lost a grandchild, was carrying grief that had nowhere to go. She stayed 2 nights, and on the second morning she wrote in her journal before she packed her things, "The dream was the river, and my grandmother was there. I hadn't thought about her voice in 40 years, and she was just standing by the water like she was waiting for me, like she'd been waiting for 40 years, like the river had been keeping her somewhere close all this time." She didn't say much. She just held my hand for what felt like a long time. I'm not sure I believe in things like this, but I'm not sure I don't. Whatever that place is, it held something for me and gave it back. That is, perhaps, the most honest thing anyone has said about Shadowbrook in 300 years. Not a haunted place, not a cursed place. A place where memory decided it was more powerful than the machinery built to erase it. where the earth held grief long enough that grief became something else, something that could be passed back to those who came from it, and to those who came after. The old families near the Roanoke still whisper about the place. The warnings passed down through generations arrive softly, not to frighten children, but to teach them something about the world, about how nothing truly suffered is ever truly lost, how it sinks into the earth and waits, how sometimes the earth calls back the people who need what it has been holding. The warning is always the same. Be careful what you bury in Carolina soil, because the ground here remembers longer than the people. So before you close your eyes tonight, think about what you are still carrying that has no name. The grief without a ceremony, the love without a destination, the thing inside you that has been waiting for a river where it could finally rest. Because somewhere along that dark Carolina water, the ancestor is still standing at the edge, patient, watching. And if your sleep ever finds that river, he already knows the thing you came to give back. He has been holding it for you, for longer than you know. Subscribe to Footnotes of Fear, because the stories we tell about the dead are always really about the living. And the next story is already waiting somewhere in the dark, where the water remembers everything, and the river never forgets a name.